The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
Hello, I'm Joni Siegel, the host of the Addiction Podcast. In 2022, over 100,000 people died from drug and alcohol abuse, and that number is growing daily. Fentanyl poisoning, pot, cocaine, heroin, and even psychedelics and alcohol all contribute to this crisis, while we're bombarded with promotions from thousands of rehabs. Newborns are born addicted, and the majority of homeless people struggle with drug addiction. Drug dealers exploit online resources to sell to teens, and antidepressant use is spiraling out of control. This podcast features brutally honest guest interviews revealing harsh realities and offering hope and solutions through their stories. We don't sugarcoat anything. Guests speak raw and real. More importantly, you'll find inspiration to understand, overcome, and achieve recovery, whether for yourself or to help others, some within your own family, many among your friends or associates. Whether you're seeking help or just a glimmer of hope, our podcast equips you with the latest insights to confront this generational battle. Many listeners tell us they want to join the fight, but do not have the time or money to act, lobby, or just help. If that's you, go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast and see how you can help. Lauren Sisler, thank you so much for being willing to be on the podcast today and sharing your story.
Hey, Joni, it's great to see you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. And, I'm sure our listeners are looking and they're going, oh, that's wonderful. Lauren Sisler, who does her sideline shimmy. Why is she on the Addiction Podcast? What does she have to do with addiction? What is her story?
Well, unfortunately, addiction is something that devastated my family's life and devastated us and sent us into smithereens with the loss of both of my parents within hours of each other to prescription drug overdoses when I was just a freshman, 18 years old in college, living out my college dream as a collegiate gymnast, doing everything I thought that life had in store. And unfortunately, got the phone call from my dad and later found out that he too passed away.
Hi, my name is Amy Newman, and my husband Bobby and I have a business called Newman Intervention Services. We provide intervention services for families who have loved ones struggling with drug addiction. Our goal is to help individuals get the support and treatment they need to overcome addiction and start on the path to recovery. With our personalized and compassionate approach, we guide families through the challenging process of getting their loved one into rehab and onto a road of a healthier future. Together, we can make a positive difference in the lives of those affected by drugs. If you or someone you know is in need of an intervention, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Let's work together and bring hope and healing to those battling addiction.
Call 866-989-4499 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby.
It's been very challenging and a lot to consume and a lot to understand. And as it's almost been 22 years in March, being able to sit here and share their story openly, it has taken me a long time to have the strength and courage to be here with you today.
Well, I can understand that, and I appreciate that, and I am super sorry for your loss. That's why we do this podcast, because we really would like it if people didn't have to go through that type of loss, whether in your case it's parents or in a lot of cases it's their children. And yeah, I'm sorry.
I appreciate that. And, it's just, it's hard. But what I think and why you're here and you're having this conversation and you're bringing these conversations to the forefront, we recognize that this is so much more common than people are willing to even talk about, admit. And I think that's why these conversations are so important, because I think it is a lot easier sometimes to talk about other illnesses and other diseases and other setbacks and challenges. But when it comes to addiction, it's like, "No, I'm not going to talk about it." And you recognize like these conversations are so important because addiction lives in isolation. Addiction lives in the shadows. And if we are not willing to bring it out of the shadows, it is going to continue to thrive, and it's going to continue to devastate. It's going to continue to take lives. And it's something that, I'm grateful as a sports reporter to have a voice and a platform to share stories. And now even more so the stories of people that are battling this thing and going through it. And I just want to provide hope and encouragement and, help people see the other side.
And that's exactly why we do this podcast, is to give people hope. You are absolutely right. There's such a stigma connected with addiction. And so often parents think, not my kid. And what they need to understand is it's happening to anybody and at any income level and any race and any religion. Addiction just doesn't care. But Lauren, tell us, how did your parents get addicted to painkillers? Do you know, what was their story?
So both of my parents were experiencing chronic pain. And so this was, I was a teenager. We actually had acquired some land. So we were living in Roanoke, Virginia. That's where I was from. That's where I grew up. And we had acquired some land. So mom and dad built a house. And, it's like the next chapter in this big dream. We get to move into this new house and, start a new, fresh, chapter. And that's really when you piece the timeline together, things started to fall apart. And I think some of that, was just my parents going through, obviously, the transition and the financial piece of it with, we're moving into this new house, kind of went over the budget. All of a sudden, the dominoes start to fall. Mom started having chronic pain issues, in which she was diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, and started going to a neurosurgeon, had a couple neck fusions, and from there was recommended by someone to go to a pain management doctor. And that's when really just everything, the dominoes just started to fall. And I got to be honest with you, Joni, like I share this story pretty openly, and I'm kind of giving you the timeline. But here's the crazy part about this. Like, this timeline that I'm sharing with you, I didn't even learn until just the last 2 years.
Wow.
So imagine that. Like, I'm 18 years old and I just turned 40, hit the elevator up to the 4th floor. Hello, I'm here. All of a sudden, I'm piecing all this together. And a lot of that was because I finally decided it was time to write a book. And I wanted to get it right, and I wanted to understand, and I wanted to dig deeper. And as a reporter, I dig under the surface. I try to find the intricacies of stories and the understanding of the why. What drives you, what motivates you. When I talk to these athletes and coaches, and I really wanted to dig deeper, and a lot of that was uncovered in this process of okay, so how did this happen? Right? So I'm literally a freshman in college. And I get a phone call from my dad in the middle of the night. Mind you, I had just talked to my parents a few hours sooner. I just talked to them. Mom seemed fine. We were on the phone talking about gymnastics, this new skill combination I was working on. Passed the phone off to my dad. He just celebrated his 52nd birthday. We, shared some laughs, talked a little about school. And really, he just said, through faith and determination, all things are possible. We're so proud of you. Keep moving, keep going. We love you. And we said our goodbyes, and that was it. And, I set my alarm clock and went to bed like I always did, and didn't think anything of it until I woke up to that phone ringing on my desk, and just my heart starts pounding. And it was my father calling to tell me that my mom died. And you're just like, what? Why? She's 45 years old. It's the middle of the night. We just talked on the phone. What happened, Dad? And he said, I can't explain it now. Get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And, instead it was my Uncle Mike and my cousin Justin who showed up that day.
Oh my God. I mean, you are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com. or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and give us a 5-star review. We appreciate you listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. We don't do this podcast because we are former addicts. We don't do this podcast because we have loved ones who have suffered from addiction. We do this podcast because we feel that addiction is one of the biggest problems facing the world today, and that no matter who you are, no matter your religion, no matter your income status, no matter your race, no matter anything about you, addiction affects you. This podcast is a free resource for anybody looking for help with addiction. If you would like to contribute to our podcast, go to www.patreon.com/theaddictionpodcast and make a donation of whatever amount you would like. Thank you for supporting us.
Yeah. And so, you think like, and for me, my dad said, get on the next plane. You can't, I'll be at the airport to pick you up. So I'm thinking, okay, like, I just want to get home and run and jump in my dad's arms. My dad's going to make it okay. I was a daddy's girl. Like he was going to help fix this situation. He was going to, help me cope and help me to understand and help me to get through it.
Right.
And so when I get on that plane, I had no other idea it would be anything other than my dad being at the airport that day to pick me up. And when he did not show up, and when I was told that he too passed away, it was just like I was sitting in the backseat of that car, and it's like my world just came crashing down. Like I remember looking out the window and almost just seeing like the light closing in, and just like, it's almost like I was just being squeezed and like, and
that's just devastating. I mean, completely devastating.
Well, and I think too with my family, I mentioned to you, we had talked on the phone that night. When I went off to Rutgers, like it was an 8-hour drive. It wasn't close. So I wasn't packing up going home on the weekend. So it was rare that I got to see my parents unless it was the holidays. They had come to see one gymnastics competition, but we were so close. I mean, not a day went by that we didn't talk on the phone, that we didn't communicate, that we didn't have a conversation. I was so close to my parents, and, they were my best friends. And were they perfect? No. Was I perfect? No. I was definitely not a perfect little angel. While I focused on gymnastics and did life pretty well, I think, I was a little brat at times too. And, I look back on those times and I'm like, geez, like Lauren, like, come on, but with that being said, like just a complete and utter shock. And you think like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to this place? And it would be years, Joni, before I would truly understand, and before I would truly sit in this chair and look at you and say, my parents died of drug overdoses.
I understand. And you had no idea that there was a drug problem, that they were, that your mom and your dad had pain issues as well. And so they were.
Yeah, my dad had chronic back pain as well. So I mentioned my mom, the degenerative disc disease. My dad had the chronic back pain. So they started going to the same pain management doctor.
Okay.
They were prescribed several narcotics, and really the Oxycontin, I think, is what probably started that downward spiral for them.
Yep.
Both prescribed it.
Do you know when? What year?
So they died in 2003. Looking back at my mom's medical records, I think the first time she was prescribed oxys were in 99.
Okay.
So she had her surgeries, was prescribed the Oxycontin. And then here's what's crazy about it, Joni, is I was able to go back and look at some of the medical records. And my mom had applied for disability and was denied. So finally she got an attorney to help her push this thing through. And she was asked to journal about what she, how she was feeling, what she was taking, and, kind of the day to day. Looking back at this, my mom was so by the book. Like this woman, like, so the glue in the family. Like if we had the money, if we didn't have the money, my dad was going to spend it. My dad was the spender. My mom was like the reality check. Okay. Like this is what we have in the bank. Simmer down now. But she was so by the book. And I'm reading through these journals. And, I woke up this morning and on a pain scale from 1 to 10, I felt this, and, I took this, and, you see like each pill that she took, or, the milligrams and dosage of her Oxycontin. And then I think she was taking like an antidepressant. And it was just wild to me because in the journaling, there was this level of innocence that you're like, so this is the same woman that literally put a fentanyl patch in the freezer, sucked on it and overdosed and died. Like, what? And I think that was the hardest part for me to comprehend, is how we ended up from there to there and with no clue.
And did the journal give any indication of how that came about, or did you learn how that happened?
No, and I think the journal, because the journal kind of, the journaling kind of just happened when she was applying for the disability.
Oh, that's right.
Once that was pushed through.
Yeah.
But just even thinking back on like their behaviors and stuff, there were some things that I was just like, oh, that kind of makes sense. My dad would like literally be on the couch watching a movie, remote in the air, and he'd be like, So I just thought, like, Dad's tired. He works hard. He commutes over an hour each way to, work. Like, nothing out of the ordinary. And, here's the thing, though, and I will full disclosure on this. My dad was an alcoholic. That was something I knew. But at 10 years old, like, what do you really know about alcoholism? I just knew, like, Mom would say, go back to your AA meetings. And that's all I knew. I didn't know anything else. I just knew, like, oh, Dad's not supposed to be drinking.
Right.
And then he'd be fine for 6 months. So that piece of it was there. And that was known by our family, even my aunt and uncle and people on the outside. But in terms of the chronic pain and the prescriptions that were being shelled out and what was happening, I think that is the part that we all just are shaking our heads like, how did this happen? And how did we not know? And I mean, you gotta imagine, I am a professional storyteller and a professional question asker for a living. And I think to myself, like, dang, like, why did I not ask more questions back then? And I wasn't mature. I didn't know. I didn't understand. And again, my parents did such a darn good job of hiding it.
And you were there most of the time. If you'd been at a college closer and had gotten with them more often, you might have noticed it more. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little hard when you only see them several times a year. And likely those times, they were prepared for the fact that you were going to be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I will say this, I think that, so when I left the house, that would have been in September and they died in March. So I think obviously that's when things really started downward spiral. My brother, Alan, was in the Navy. He was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, about 3.5 hours away from home. So he was not in the house a lot. He would come home with his Navy buddies. But like you said, they probably prepared for that. Okay. Let's button things up. But when I was still in the house in high school, especially like my senior, I would be willing to bet that's when things probably started to really get pretty sticky with the addiction. I do recall a couple times, and one specific where my mom was so infuriated with my dad for taking her medication. I didn't know what that meant. I was like, oh, like Dad probably wasn't feeling good today. Like, oh, I just took one of Mom's pills. But I didn't understand. Like, that's a really big deal to someone that is heavily reliant on that medication to function.
Yep.
And she was so mad. And I was like, I'm talking to the point where she was like, screaming at him, like, why did you do this? Yep. And I'm like in the house, like, oh my gosh. And I'm shaking and I'm like, what is happening? I didn't understand it then. But here we are, in this, situation. And looking back on it, I'm like, red flag, because of the irritability and what she was going through at the time and just being so angry. And like you said, you almost distance yourself from it, but you're also told a story so many times and you're told it's okay so many times and everything's fine that you just kind of start to almost like look past the little things, right? You kind of just, Lauren,
it's not a, this doesn't mean anything bad about you, but you don't want to look at your parents and think my parents are drug addicts. It's just not going to be first and foremost. Do you know what I mean?
No.
And you think, oh, she's having a bad day and gee, Mom experiences a lot of pain, but it sounds to me like 99 was right when the whole opioid epidemic really was starting to take off because Purdue and the Sacklers, they lied about OxyContin. They lied about its, addictiveness. And, you're not going to look at that and go, oh, my parents are addicted to painkillers. You're just not going to. And it doesn't mean there's anything. I don't know if I'm saying this right. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just not going to be the first thing that pops into your head.
Yeah. And that's so valid, because I think it is easy. And I think this is such an encouraging conversation for people, because I think we, on the outside, if you're a loved one of an addict, or, whether you are the individual or a loved one of the addict, I think it's so easy to beat yourself up and say, like, why did this happen? And like, how did I let this happen? And you almost start to put the onus on yourself.
Yep.
And then it's like, wait a sec, like, it wasn't my job, but also like they did a really good job of hiding it. Like, Joni, I had no idea, but like my parents were literally at this point, like stroking $10 checks to the power company to keep the power on. Like, and on the outside, I just thought, like, it was crazy to me, because my gas tank was always full. I was always on the way to practice. I always had my leotards, my grips, my everything I needed for gymnastics. Like, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And then my mom shows up to the gym where I trained an hour away, and she would ride into work sometimes with my dad, or, drive separately, but she would show up at the gym and she'd be working in the back, like in the, in the office, and taking phone calls and stuff. And I'm like, well, maybe she's just bored. Like, it was presented to me like she was just trying to, pass some time. She's in pain. She wants to not think about the pain. She's not working. She wants something to, pass the time away. But what I really found out was that literally they couldn't afford my tuition, my $400 a month or whatever it was at that point. And that she had to work off to pay the debts to keep me in gymnastics.
Wow.
And it's the little things like that I had no inkling of,
Right.
Not an ounce of any concern. And you just think, wow, like how they did such a good job of keeping us in the dark
Yep.
about what was happening.
Yep. And we've talked to parents about how if your teen all of a sudden is having erratic behavior, or your teen is sleeping all day, you might want to check it out. You might want to do a drug test or do a urine test. We talked about that years ago on the podcast when we had a young man who was a former addict. So he knew very well what some of those indicators are, because the addict is very good at hiding it.
Hey, and it's funny you bring that up, because obviously now having a almost 16-month-old, I've started thinking, like, there's going to come a time where I got to have these conversations. And I'm now a mom now, and I hope and pray that I am way more vulnerable and open with my son than my parents ever were with us. And it's probably a lot easier said than done. I will say that. But you mentioned that about the drug testing, and it's interesting because several years back when I started really venturing into this, prevention world and this education and understanding and the awareness piece of all this, I remember hearing a guy that works for a local treatment center up here in Alabama say, well, I drug test my kids. And I was like, well, man, like, you just don't trust your kids. And he's like, it's not, my kids, by all accounts, are not using, and they're really good kids making straight A's, all the things. But he said, when I drug test them, they know that if they go to a party, they go somewhere after a football game, that mom and dad are going to test them when they come home. So not only does it serve as an accountability partner, but also, oh, by the way, there's peer pressure. Somebody going to peer pressure you. So guess what? You get to put it back on mom and dad and say, I cannot touch this because I'm going to get drug tested when I get home. And if I do, I'm going to lose my phone. I'm going to lose my privileges. I'm going to lose my right to drive. I'm going to lose my opportunity to be out on the football field to practice. Like, put it back on that. And I thought at the time, I was like, well, man, he must just not trust his kids. And I had such an open relationship with my parents that, I didn't think that, I kind of thought like, man, like my parents trusted me. Like, why doesn't he trust his kids? But now I'm sitting here like, brilliant man, you are. Like, what a brilliant idea. And again, it's not a matter of trust, because I do think this, Joni, and I think this is really important. I know I'm diving into the parent thing here.
It's okay.
And I think in a lot of ways, my parents were my best friends.
Yep.
And I think in some ways it's a beautiful thing. But I think in other ways, it can almost be to a fault where when it came to discipline and punishment and consequences, oh, like just brush it under the rug, it'll be okay. Like I literally never got grounded. Never, like I never faced consequences for dumb things, even if it still should have been consequential. Yep. Even if it was just me talking back or doing something. And I think, and this is the case for my brother and I both. And I think about that now and I'm like, I think to a fault, you can be almost too close and too besties with your parents to the point where, you might fall into the trap of getting away with more or not facing consequences or not feeling the weight of and magnitude of things that could potentially lead you down a path such as addiction.
Yep.
And, looking at that now as a parent, I think I'm so grateful that my parents were my best friends, but I also think you do have to set boundaries and learn when to be a parent, when to be a friend, and how to keep the two separated and know, like, first and foremost, you've got to be a parent.
You do. You have to. And, when you were talking about this gentleman and drug testing his kids, and it's valid to look at it as a trust issue, but it's also a safety issue because if a teen goes to a party and doesn't have that bit of discipline there, and they try a Percocet that's laced with fentanyl, they're going to die. And so it's a safety thing. You know what I mean? In that if he doesn't try that Percocet because he knows that when he comes home, he's going to get drug tested, it could
be the one
life.
thing that saved his life.
Yeah, it could be the one thing that saved his life.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, and these conversations, I love having these conversations because I'm still learning,
Yep.
I'm not young. I mean, I'm a new mom, I should say. I'm a new mom trying to figure this thing out. And I don't think there is a rule book. There's not a manual that tells you how to do this thing. No. But I remember sitting at the gravesite of both my parents just the summer, and I'd taken Mason with me. And, he's not even walking, like picking stuff up and like, pulling the petals off my parents' flowers, just whatever. He's oblivious to where we're at. But it was a moment where I just like soaked it in and recognized, like, I recognized the beauty in it, that I was able to take him there to be in that moment with me. But also like, it was that deep inner sense of, I want him to know my parents. And I want him to know everything. I want him to know all about my parents. And I don't want to hold things back and to be afraid for him to understand the magnitude of what happened to them.
Yep.
And that there's a time and a place, and I think a timeline, and I think that ebbs and flows of what that'll look like. But that is probably one thing that I don't know if you call it regret, but wish more than anything that my parents would have been more open and transparent with me and my brother, and our family about their struggles and what they were dealing with. And I think, I want my son to feel open to always come to me when he's struggling, when he feels lost, when he feels he just needs somebody to hold his hand. I don't care if he's 5 years old or 50 years old.
Yep.
And, I want to teach that early, that it's okay for him to come to mom.
But when you think about it, Lauren, it's tough enough for a teen or even an older child to own up to being an addict because there's a lot of shame connected with it.
Yeah.
And we know this not because my husband and I have been addicts, but because of all the people we've spoken to. But imagine you're a parent and you have to share with your child that you have an addiction problem. I just feel like that would be way worse. That's because parents are not supposed to be the ones admitting the weaknesses. They're supposed to be the strong ones who are going to help the child through their problems, not the other way around. So I can see how that would happen. It's so tragic.
It's so much easier said than done, right? And I think when you're living it like they were, because I also think too, I don't know what point maybe they recognized they were battling addiction. I don't know if it was earlier. It might have been the last days. I mean, who knows? Maybe it never,
And maybe never.
to the very end,
Yeah.
you know? Um,
Because that's the first thing is you have to admit you have a problem. And if they don't do that, if they don't ever do that, then they continue going along thinking they can control it and they can manage it.
Yeah.
You know?
And, you know, my dad definitely admitted to the alcoholism. That was another thing, pulling some of those medical records out and some of his conversations with his specialist that was working with him through all of this. And, you know, earlier on when he was dealing with the addiction, with the alcoholism, you know, but I think also too, sometimes there's a separation where a lot of times it's like, well, I can't drink alcohol, but I can take pills. And it's a
Right.
totally different.
Right.
So
Right.
again, I don't know how my parents felt and where they were at and all of that. You know, in what that would have looked like if we ever would have had a conversation.
Yeah.
But to your point, you know, I definitely think it's a lot easier said than done. I just hope that I can find the courage to be as open and honest as I possibly can with my son in a way that allows him to see things through an authentic lens, you know, and empowers him to feel that he can live life as authentically as possible. But, you know, it's not linear. Right. I mean,
Right.
I think that's also a process of, I think there's some things that you kind of just open up to the world. And then there's things that you just, you know, you stuff down and you don't want to acknowledge it.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your book. I think you've already told us a lot about it, but tell us a little bit about it.
Well, you know, because obviously digging into the story. So yeah, the book is Shatterproof. I got it back here on my dresser here. So Shatterproof.
Okay.
So excited about this. And, you know, it's interesting coming up. A lot of people have asked me about the title of the book, and, you know, it was kind of cool, you know, working with my publisher and, you know, Gary Schneeberger. We really like sat down and kind of had this conversation. Like the title, like finding the title of the book was like, oh, so hard. But the idea for Shatterproof, and I just love this part of it so much. So Gary had said, you know, as we're talking back and forth and with Darren, my publisher, like, okay, you know, you think about life and you get the phone call from your dad and then you land at the airport and you find out that your dad too's passed away. So in a matter of 6 hours, both your parents have died. Literally, someone took a baseball bat to your life and shattered it into a million pieces. But you, through the work and just the absolute grind and pushing through and making different choices and making decisions, have shown people that it is possible to become shatterproof, that you can pick up the pieces, you can become resilient, and you can stand on your own 2 feet again and keep walking that path forward.
Yep.
And I think that was so encouraging to me, just kind of having that vision, because I do think that a lot of times we feel broken. We feel that we're broken, we're shattered into a million pieces, and there's no way that life can go on.
Yep.
And I would say that probably speaks to those of us that have experienced loss and tragedy, shame, and grief. We all have.
Yep.
And also people that are walking through addiction, that we're broken, we're less than, we're not worthy of all those things.
Yep.
But guess what? Every single one of you listening today is worthy of that. And every single one of you is shatterproof and can be that. And I think a lot of that is, you know, just understanding that we all have a story. And in this book, it's going through everything, you know, that I went through, uncovering a lot of the layers, understanding the shame that was associated with it because of how my parents died and the years that I spent running from it and fabricating this sugar-coated story to protect them, to protect my family. And then recognizing like, oh, wow, like this is part of their story. And as my auntie Linda, my mom's sister, helped me to understand, like, your parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they lived their lives. And that is what I have started to uncover and recognize in this book. And so while this book uncovers their addiction and their downfall, it also shows you the loving people that they were and the amazing people that they were and the legacy that they continue to carry through the work that I do and the work that our family does, and really just in life and being able to pay it forward to people, because everyone has a story.
Yep.
And my mantra is fall in love with your story. And my hope and goal is that I can meet people where they're at and help them to truly love and, you know, truly fall in love with their stories and find joy and purpose in every chapter and recognize that every single chapter, the good and the bad, all shape who you are today. And now it's up to you to decide how you're going to use it.
That's right. That's a great message. And are you going around and talking about this whole story? Are you doing some public speaking about it?
Yeah. So, I've had the opportunity to go and do some media work, talk to some different entities, got to do a segment on Good Morning America back when the book launched October 1st, and getting to talk to wonderful people like you and Steve back behind the camera there, waving at Steve. Just getting to do a lot of podcasts and talk about it. And then a lot of public speaking, as you mentioned. So, I've been doing some public speaking for several years now, but really have kind of come into this like shatterproof. How do you become shatterproof? And using that to help organizations and to talk to different groups. And, just a couple weeks ago, I was in Des Moines talking to the Iowa Hospital Association. I'm going to be talking to landscaping professionals in Charlotte. I'm talking to the Southeastern, coal mine conference, mine conference. It's just kind of the gamut. But what does that tell you, Joni? That tells you that this topic and what we're talking about is universal.
No one is exempt. No one is exempt from this problem.
Yep. And so really just leaning into that. And that's, we all are faced with challenges and we all deal with shame, and how do we overcome that? And so for me, it's just been so cool to like have the opportunity to just meet with people, because I'm in the sports world. Like I am ingrained in college football, and it's really, I love that part. I love my job, but I also love the opportunity to go out and meet people like yourself and get to have these conversations that can be so impactful. And again, just to recognize like every single one of us has a story, and now you have an opportunity to use it, to fall in love with it, and to make something special from it, and to recognize that even those setbacks that you've had can be, such a fuel to push you forward and just to make you stronger and more resilient.
Nice. I love it. Thank you so much, Lauren. Appreciate you writing the book. And once again, for the listeners, her last name is Sisler, Sisler, Lauren, Lauren. And the book is Shatterproof. And you can get it on Amazon. I will put the link up in the show notes. And Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joni. I appreciate you and just appreciate your message and what you and Steve are doing to just bring this to people, to have these conversations. So heartwarming. And while it's not an easy conversation to have, I think it's a great conversation to have. And I'm excited just to be a part of it. And thank you so much for all the great work you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening today. I think that Lauren's story is kind of the opposite from what we hear. We talk to parents, and parents talk about losing their children to addiction. And here is a young woman who lost both her parents within a matter of hours. And that should just never happen to anyone, a parent, a child, or anyone. We will be back again next week with another interview. And today is Halloween, so we're getting right into the middle of the holiday season. The holidays are one of the worst times for addicts and loved ones of addicts. You don't want to put your addict into treatment because you want them around for the holidays. It's a really bad idea. And they need to go into treatment. If you know someone who's addicted, if you yourself are addicted, you need to reach out. You need to get help. You need to do it now, not after Christmas, not after the new year. You need to do it now. We'll be back with another interview next week.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com.